address is antonucci23@gmail. Should I spell that for you?
ANTONUCCI.
Actually, I don't even need to get out there.
Why was that? I'm confused as to. I'm not sure that they did that, so you need to just give it a little bit of time.
No, we see their evidence.
I know, I understand, but my question is, if we're doing this, you don't if they did. You mean if they did? Yeah.
I just needed to know. He's going to improve it.
Are we good? Yeah, sure. We begin with the story of Sarine from Weber 99. Sarine tells the story of a male sculptor, Captain Angrinus, with Laza Manila, a failed seduction that results from misreading Laza Manila. Sarine falls in love with the prima donna, an ideal beauty. She displays exquisite female forms he so ardently desired. Sarine must have Laza Manila's love. He embarks on the wooing of his mistress, even after being warned off. He drunkenly makes his bid, but his mistress escapes, describing herself as an accursed figure, in need of a brother, a protector. I forbid you to love me. I can be your devout friend, but no more. Not love you, but my dearest angel, you're my life, my happiness. Laza Manila inquires, and if I were not a woman? Sarine thinks Laza Manila is joking. Sarine devises a plan to kidnap her from a party where he sees Laza Manila singing dressed like a man. Sarine asks if she is so attired out of respect. The nobleman replies, she? Has there ever been a woman on the Roman stage? Sarine insists, I should kill you, but leaving you alive is condemning you to something worse than death. It's an illusion. I shall forever think of this imaginary woman when I see a real woman. 3 men enter who rescue Laza Manila by stabbing Sarine. It is a good deed, Sarine tells his murderers. Sarine transforms his murder into a suicide, fulfilling his promise to be left her to die. The story of Sarine is the best interpreted guide for retelling the tale of US-Cuban relations. Castro-Cuba represents Laza Manila. Weber 99. There's no better interpreted guide than Sarine. The narrative has no output. The narrative concerns only yourself. The story highlights how Balzac's story plays its mysteries and located in the relation of figure beyond orientation. Castro-Cuba become disoriented, disempowered. Castration is contagious, and the United States has desired Cuba, both in foreign policy discourse as a colony, metaphorically as a trophy mistress. Weber 99. The U.S. headless body of interest sex and gender, including the flag and dagger, hegemonic again, reflect the grievance, foreign foundational formation for the U.S. public stand for all America, masculine U.S. losses, Caribbean where the feminized Cuban symbolic effort to start playing a role as a trophy mistress. Cuba was a neo-colony during feminine conflict with the U.S. relied on forced hegemonic/masculine identity crisis. Hegemonic crisis came in the form of the Cuban Revolution. Cuba's iconic femininity and hybrid masculinity survived re-entering Cuba. The mixed identity best described as an unidentified sexual object, and the United States failed to recognize the re-engenderment of Cuba and continues to pursue Cuba as an idealized feminine object, leading the now queered United States to construct a fake phallus to avoid castration anxiety. The United States continues to read itself incorrectly. Our rereading censored breakdown the fake phallus, referred to as the masquerade, Weber 99. And the U.S. misrecognized mixed identity Cuba continued to pursue Cuba's non-idealized femininity even once his mistress is going to be the trophy mistress turned out to be no trophy. The strengths of all the economy U.S. foreign policy lost by the phallic power code its inability to produce meaning that resulted from lack of feminine objects and expresses masculine identity. The U.S. encountered the Castro Cuba actually wasn't the best phallic era. U.S. phallic authority when it comes to the transport U.S. policy toward the Caribbean against the series of police sponsored castration anxiety. The U.S. now misreads the self-strategy dominant the U.S. foreign policy misreading the invasion of Dominican Republic, certain for simulation of phallic power grid in Panama and middle masquerade went to the U.S. embraces its symbolic castration and similarly castration in order to guard itself against castration is really hard to find the Caribbean links the discourse, myth, discourse, or even the discourse of resistant language power. U.S. by narcissism is obsessed with own legitimization of counter Caribbean rhythms, and the United States masquerade is an attempt to conceal the lack of phallic power, literalizing castration anxiety. This masquerade results in interventions and encirclements around the world, forecloses us taking the role of the hysteria. Weber 99 masquerade is manufactured like the story of form is certain distance to oneself and one's image simply is added not concealed lack of breath to create the appearance of one lack of beard as a lack of phallic and it was exhibited symptomatically through male history, according to lack of phallic power, leading make meaning cannot be made because falsely exposed masquerade, quite a lack of value of the reluctance to make meaning, to create this anti-hysterical for works to affect the separation between one that has one eye, to design oneself hysterical, same mind, the masquerade and subject formally prized time without desire, be the false and have the false note, to bridge and second position, be the false, be the second word desire of the other, and appears the second of our being, the false is always being for masculine, subject to reconfirming arguments not yet through the recognition of being for the US need of the feminine, is a Caribbean screen to be the false men, except to have the false yet never to be at there, is it never impossible for any ever to avoid the position having the false and the others, and they made a feature that compelled to articulate nine things between impossibilities, but masquerade is also a strategy under taken to avert the increased expected to surround the possess the fallacy, theoretical transfastic, legalizing anxiety, fallacy of determination, fallacious manifestation, exactly the strategy of assurance and anxiety through artificial every conversation, the US capital of the possessive balance in US Caribbean relations until the capital cash regime, US Caribbean policy, as against series of placements or cash regime and cashration, anxiety often through strategy, millennium father powers the US state in the non-invasion, accepted by failed to do in the Panama invasion, and the hysteric discourse is necessary to create new knowledge and ethical law, encountering university discourse, specific policy ideas they outline are only stand in for the real ethical law. Schroeder, in the hysteric discourse, this sort of the of laws within the hysteric discourse, the hysteric discourse in itself to actual the hysteric discourse challenging critiques of this object of desires, not necessarily the collective goals of society, identify university discourse, practical discourse is a new type of knowledge represents as discourse that's to the receptive ones. Knowledge now becomes accessible, actualization, morality, interested as ethical laws, specific moral principles or policy goals, but imaginary sin is ethical law. The ultimate knowledge seeks to answer the question, what is ethical law? The hysteric can express her good if further in his part, the hysteric can be article. She knows she cannot create a fair judgment, but she might be able to write specific wrongs. Perpetuation of the suppression of the lack regulates education. It creates bureaucratized knowledge, rendering us automatons. Tro and 9. The knowledge in university discourse not to be bureaucratized knowledge. The bureaucracy and other massive university discourse produces subjects are not creative subjects where they are time by time of the university discourse educational highly bureaucratic education with knowledge control and prescribe the subordination, the hysteric and the master is captured. What happened to the master? The master produces knowledge about the truth of the hysteric will of course once again undermine and the masquerade forecloses economic engagement with Cuba in the form of the embargo Weber 99. He was in administration never forgave Castro's Cuba devaluation while mercury designated to assassinate Castro masculine character by plot and habits of your fallout. This operation was not targeted Cuba that has continued the US embargo against Cuba embargo that America's couple tries to another US embargo. The United States continues acts towards the jealous, turn brutal as friend spouse. And thus Zane and I propose to reread US-Cuban economic engagement through denotation and connotation. Our advocacy breaks down the remnant Cold War coding relations and mythology surrounding them. Weber 99. I propose to reread US relations, functions of human engagement, communication, the denotation and connotation. Denotation not the first meaning for transpeace of this very myth by which the text represents return the nature of link relating to its nature. The US attempt to guarantee building half last word of symptoms of denotation representation always end up telling too much real and themselves as mere representation that a powerful source is also simply must because their meanings are very much from the sense of connotation are from denotation. It except the US Cuba to where the story in terms of how the US Cuba Cuban itself, how Castro's Cuba represents the codification, what affects telling the story, how to the US and on US relations. And rereading through connotation and denotation is crucial. By juxtaposing the denotive meta discourse along our connotive counter history, external meanings become clear. Bronson said before, there exists an average future we can only cross a certain meaning version of the world that is connotation. Connotation, second rereading, second part is a self-conscious sound system, grammar, signification, denotation, semiologists can tell hierarchy between connotation, criticism, and connotation. Only half does not take into account these type of these types, whether really types to deny connotation altogether through all the differential value of the type of views to define specific apparatus for readerly text connotations away into the listening of classic text connotation and determination, which has the percolates itself no ulterior exterior into other states of the text. We must not confuse connotation with association of ideas. Your role as an educator is to facilitate a more nuanced understanding of history, challenging historical privilege and domination specifically, and make symbolic and material history is necessary to break out of the power structures that bureaucratized knowledge. As long as status quo knowledge production continues, we are taught to embrace the colonial sensibility. Each individual round acts as a starting point for change because it breaks down the ideological alibi of the territorial state. Travanenko and Faber roles that shapes discourse and more nuanced understanding of history. This would advance an understanding about the complete relations, including the wisdom that we're in the field of forms of power that define related history. There is no single understanding of sovereignty and colonization. We need to questioning and within our class and we allow for this definition reframing narrative of U.S. history, knowing how we get educational means emphasizing how correct the very tangible effects in foreign national history by vindicating sort of the centrality of the vessels is incredible. Framing a specific representation of the Western world, you as most frequently made time to watching the classroom, the students rely on the variety of historical reasons that the most likely argument will be colonial sensibility. We need to insist on the nation's simultaneous materially and symbolic and understanding of the majority of the nation's terms of ideological alibi of the territorial state are for us a starting point. So, I have 40 seconds. Do you want anything? Fiction reality is a routine and necessary part of enchantment. Hold transformative power over reality. The Sestina in 94 construction suggested her basic reference of fictionality's routine aspect of social life as not as a designative procedure. When we talk about culture imagination, we raise an issue about the key process of modernity, prominent theoretical perspectives of the process for the diminution of freedom and the general disengagement of the world, the process of alienation, loss of personal interaction and culture, or as a loss of substance and like wealth and culture production, the racist mythology take place of region only means forms may be out of category, except the mode of integration post. Mode of integration, I'll flash that to you. Or email it, please. Do you mind if I just put the card in like the email? That's it.
Lord?
I'll give you the. I put it in after where it's marked.
Okay, you're good?
Yeah.
What is desire?
Desire is like, I guess, what we want.
What we want, okay. So the US has desired Cuba, what is the United States? What constitutes it?
I think in the context of our AF, it's like mostly federal government actions.
Does everyone in the United States desire Cuba?
I can't make that claim, but I don't think so.
Okay. Then I guess what makes desire like masculinized? What does that consist?
I'm kind of confused by the question, but I think that the U.S. desired Cuba as its quote-unquote trophy mistress because it perceived Cuba as feminine, and then when the U.S. when Castro was power,
who in the United States did that?
I guess the government actors.
So
They acted as like a
the signing of the treaty that ended the
So
Spanish
all of the
American
government
War.
actors?
No,
I mean-
and initiated with the signing of the treaty that ended the Spanish-American War. The United States, as a whole,
but that
called
treaty
for,
didn't come out of nowhere. Right?
didn't come out of nowhere, but neither is it implication of the entire federal government. But what we're more critiquing is
Okay,
that
then why did you say the United States has desired Cuba?
Because they did.
They did? Who's
Yeah,
that?
the United States government. Like they acted as a
That seems
collective whole,
insufficient.
i.e. there were U.S. actions that expressed the U.S. desire for Cuba.
Okay, the Trofanico card describes the role of the educator. How does one become an educator?
I think that the judges are an educator. I don't really know like
Why are
the
they?
process because they are educating us.
What does it take to be an educator?
We'll defer to Zane on that. What does it take to be an educator?
to be teaching.
To be teaching. Okay. Who can teach?
Anything?
Okay. The 1AC seems to take the stance that denotation is a negative thing. Why did you denote the 1AC with
No, it's not a negative thing. It's that connotation is a more important understanding of what has happened.
Okay, then why did you denote the 1AC with opposites?
Well, that's not like denotation, but also we don't say that denotation is bad. We think that using a connotative understanding of the U.S. interactions with Cuba is a better way of understanding why the U.S. did what it did.
Okay. I guess, how does the act, I guess, or the rereading of the 1AC, I guess, change the symbolic economy or engage it?
Well, obviously, like the 20 people in this room are the only people who hear the 1AC, but I think that it changes our understanding of the U.S. actions, which is net better because it breaks out of that bureaucratized knowledge production.
Okay, and your argument is that the reading of the story is that changes that symbolic economy, or is it?
Well, it's that we use the story that we read at the top to help understand how the U.S. acted, i.e. the U.S. was Sarine and it desired Cuba, and then it failed to acquire them.
That's good.
That's good.
Okay, just need to email it. It'll be one off and then case.
Do you want the...
Sure. Thanks.
Did you already send it?
Yes, I just sent it. I have like a 10-second delay on my email. So
Yeah, I just got it.
Is anybody not ready?
The absence of the animals, the presence of anthropocentrism, and the utilization of humanist politics is also fundamentally inaccessible to the animal body. Their performance actualizes itself through mass violence against the animal. That's Bell and Russell in 2000. The exploration of questions of race, gender, class, and sexuality is preceded with little acknowledgement of the systemic links between human oppression and the domination of nature, the more than human world, and the human relationship to have been ignored, the suffering and exploitation of other beings in the globally ecological crisis where irrelevant non-human beings were shrouded in silence. There is a need to scrutinize the language we use in the epistemological frameworks to treat social categories as stable and unchanged, and changing is to reproduce apparent relations of power. The anthropocentric bias and critical pedagogy manifests itself in silence. Anthropocentrism occurs in those places where speakers reveal the assumptions they think do not need to defend beliefs they expect to share with their audience, defines the boundaries of human membership according to hierarchical dichotomy that establishes human superiority. Humans are able to infuse the world with their creative presence. Fear represents animals to their lack of such traits. They do to passively accept that given humans inhabit a world which they create and transform around what they can separate themselves, change in the service of human freedom is seen to be our primary agenda. Humans are cast as active agents who essences to transform the world as acceptance, wonders, reverence, or beyond the pale human animal opposition. It's taken for granted, not acknowledged, and therein lies the problem. This becomes the normal way of seeing the world and limits the possibilities of confronting inequalities. The human enterprise is not question metaphors reinforce the problem of anthropocentrism thinking and include understanding of individuals as free entities will take responsibility for creating themselves as freedom and social idle forms of oppression. How is freedom predicated on the exploitation of the non-human? Such queries push against understanding of self and community and bring into focus the underlying tension between freedom and the world and human. All humans are assumed to be free agents separate from nature. It is used to justify exploitation of human groups aimed to be closer to nature, that is animalistic, irrational, savage, or uncivilized. This organic apartheid is bolstered in the belief that language elevates biological existence to meaningful social existence. Language becomes a medium through which we set ourselves above. To view language as embedded in critical pedagogy, its subjectivity are lodged in the domain of humanity. The possibility of encountering anything more than the object is nil, and obsession with language, i.e. the denotation and connotative focus of the 1AC and human communication replicates anthropocentric norms. That's Bell and Russell in 2000. Structuralism tends to reinforce humanist assumptions about nature. Voices have been preempted by the exclusive focus on human language and human-centered epistemology. Frame of relation between language, communication, and meaningful experience are being conceptualized. We can concentrate on narratives that shape understanding of human nature as we touch on the misplaced presumption of human superiority based on the linguistic capability, and the brutalization of human populations is horrific, but there is an important divergence saying we're never served on a plate and eaten. The ethics of eating should be the starting point of impact calculus. That's Pugliese in 13. The caesura between the human and the animal establishes the condition of the possibility for the emergence of the human. The human is the result of ceaseless division in caesura. It is more urgent to work at these divisions and ask why, as humanity is separated from the animal, than to take position on the great issues of both human rights and values. The human master can beat, knock, kill, kick the animal and the slave, but they cannot eat the enslaved human. The Moses testimony of the homology between human slave and enslaved animal holds up to the interdictory limit point articulated in Moses' testimony as the biopolitical freedom and torture, kill, and slave form of human life by absolute impunity, and the attendant prohibition on eating the human animal slave. And anthropocentrism is the original and foundational hierarchy that structures all other forms of oppression. That is best in 2007. And human exploitation of animals is the cause of hierarchy. Animals have been shaping the course of thought, psychology, moral, social life, the history of present human nature. Human has deep roots in human over animal. Human domination of animals has emerged 10,000 years ago with the rise of agricultural study. It was the first hierarchical domination laid the groundwork for slavery, warfare, genocide. Human liberation is implausible if disconnected from animal liberation. The tools humans devise for the mass confinement of slaughter of animals or mobilizing against human groups. The human subjugation of animals paves the way for all other systems of domination. Humans need to establish their dominance over animals through domestication. Bred them for desired traits and control them in various ways. Humans developed numerous technologies such as pens, cages, collars, ropes, chains, and branding. Our slaves were managed like livestock. When Europeans began colonizing the metaphors, models, and technologies to exploit animal slaves were applied to human slaves. Horrors inflicted on black slaves were perfected centuries earlier. First humans exploit and slaughter animals, and they treat other people like animals. Aggressors engage in wordplay, vilifying their victims with terms such as filthy animals. Subjugated peoples once characterized animals to be hunted out like animals. Once Western norms of rationality were defined in as the humanity and social normality by first using non-human animal to measure alterity was a short step to begin viewing odd, exotic peoples as non or subhuman, and our alternative is a complete refusal of the representation of humanity itself. Only this destroys its coherency. Their attempt to make humanity whole only re-territorializes the violence of nature of that race itself. That's Colbert in 12. Human races are facing extinction because humanity has continued itself as a race. The idea of species enables human exceptionalism. Humanity has become a race. Racial unity via the territorialization of the being. It is the intense German influx of ever-present and highly complex differentials that compose it being a race. Can occur. Race occurs through territorialization when social bodies not organized from without but appears expression of the ground. When people are a common ground, racism does not discriminate. Enough does not recognize the humanity or insufficiently distinguished. Imagine that with deep family are all the same because this monstrous production of man in general trajectory of extinction appears to be relentless. Man's self-evident unity precludes any questioning of humanity's composition, and the furthest possibility of us becoming our were to replace outside humanity is a matters that cannot be reduced to human intentionality. We might begin to discern a pulsation of difference in a time other than the self. Finding humanity as art is tied to essentially to the non-existence of humanity. Racial delirium is not only a passage through differential flux from which identities emerge and tales that we destroy civilization, leading any produced culture in ruins. And our speech act is a part of a performance that writes in the place of the animals that die. This process of forefronting the positionality of the animal is necessary to promote ethical self-reflexivity. The role of the ballad is to move toward a true political space. It's colored in 13. A true political space is always a space contestation of those who are counted and unnamed as true political space necessarily includes by virtue of their exclusion animals. How we respond to this dynamic ought to be a central question in critical scholarship, and to be a philosopher to try to place the animals that die. This is imperfect, but is improvement over being a spokesperson for animals, often characterized as speechless, and may be rendered more so by having spokesperson point to speak on their behalf. This is written in place of those encountered unnamed non-subjects of political space, the animals that die, the non-humans, the hundreds of millions of animals that are living out our nightmares, injected, tested, prodded, that discarded, we have denied, disavowed, and misunderstood the animal. They refuse speech, morality, emotion, mourning, culture. The list has no limit. Seeing some see identifying as denial and consequential belief in human inferiority is deep to people's hearts and senses of themselves. It also seems not a simple matter of inserting excluding to the non-political order, which neglects how these various subversions and exclusions are ordered condition of being. Case. The 1AC's invocation of citations is a double turn with their entire attempt to deconstruct the text of Sarine, a typical approach which necessarily denotes the entirety of the 1AC by presencing the author as ever having existed in the first place, fetishizing authorial intent and scholarship, and recreating linguistic imperialism. Stop citing Barth and start rendering the author dead. In light of this, the 1AC goes about their critique of denotation in a counterproductive way. Their obsession with the authorial intent realize a larger attempt to decipher the text of America's relationship with Cuba. They recreate the violence of imperial signification. Turns the case you have made only a reading which is premised on denotation possible means you vote negative on presumption. Once the author's decipher text becomes to go quite used to give the author to a text, impose the text to stop clause finish with a final signification close right. Once the author has discovered the text is a play and the critic has conquered, hence scarcely surprising not only that historically the author should have been the critic, the criticism you ever knew criticism you overthrown along with the author by refusing to acknowledge the text, a secret of the ultimate meaning, liberates the activity which might be called counter theological, properly revolutionary. If you refuse to rest meaning, it's finally refused God and hypostates, reason and science and the law. The text consists of multiple writings from several cultures entering the dialogue, parody, contestation, the multiplicity is collected, united is not the author but the reader. The reader is very space which you're inscribed without any being lost. The citation of writing concerns unity of text, not its origin is in its destination, but the destination can no longer be personal. The reader is one without history. We know that to restore writing in its future, we must reverse its myth. The birth of the reader is ransomed by the death of the author, and the lack doesn't exist. That's Robinson and 5. Constitutive lack is about Artesian myth that rejects the need for an argument for assumptions. A constitutive lack fact supposed to operate about explanation. A meaning derives from prior linguistic scheme and not interaction within the word. Lacanian theory is not open to change in an instance which is just applied when it's simply an accident under the pain of invalidation. Myth establishes a short circuit between the high-level generalizations and ultra-specific instances. Zizek advocates sweeping generalizations, shortcuts between specific instances. He wants a direct jump from the singular to the universal by reference to particular context. Lacanian psychoanalysis becomes a way to avoid a messy entanglement in specific cases. Tautology and rationality simultaneously denies it with the accidental failure of language. Magically done with the one decides its natural resistance, the objectivity to real can invoke without defining it in the psychoanalysis is enabled modern governmentality. Techniques are used to manage populations and develop disciplinary society. Milton and Rosenberg to psychoanalysis linked to the merger of governmentality. Essential power considers guiding, convicting, putting in the order of possible outcomes. Government depends on psychoanalysis and its techniques for the control of management of citizens. The science were born with the construction of persons and manageable psychoanalysis helps create politically and economically social, useful, cooperative, and docile individuals. Of course, the aim of the analyst is the betterment of society. Power, knowledge, enhance, contribute to know which person subject to the existence of disciplinary society. Inconceivable without the science is the practice of become a linchpin of developing disciplinary society and techniques for managing people. And this understanding of populations as objects to be manipulated as, to a desired political end leads to extinction. Eventually, all populations will be sacrificed as esteemed in one. Sovereign powers and power that distinguishes within like political and mere existence is no longer so much the right to put to death but disqualify, to disallow these deemed unworthy of the biopolitics, whereas war with an even more sophisticated killing machine. War becomes genocidal, visiting place polluting a biosphere which they live. The planet which their life is no longer stable, but an ethnic cleansing visits Holocaust on whole ground. Yeah, market whole ground groups. Actually.
Why are we humanist politics or inaccessible to animals?
There's a couple of links. First is just the silence of the 1AC. We think the positionality of the animal needs to be forefronted in
I'm talking in the context of the links that's like
doesn't do right.
Inaccessible to animals.
Right, sure. So the Bell and Russell card makes two. First, it makes that for lack of forwarding of the animal, and then it also makes the argument that I guess the critical pedagogy, like presuming the judge as an educator and also the humanist politics the app uses, is a link. Additionally, the second Bell and Russell card is specific to the obsession with language, like the post-structuralism.
I'm just talking about, like, I guess, why is the 1NC accessible to animals?
Because you are a specific focus on language as a strategy. Just because we use language isn't the same thing.
Why does focusing, like, obviously humans have a language and...
Right, I was getting to that. The Bell and Russell card, the second Bell and Russell card that I read says, like, the post-structuralism of the 1AC is one that relies on, like, your connotation and denotation and the reliance upon that as a mechanism for your affirmative is one that relies on these, like, somewhat arbitrary relationships in human language, which is fundamentally inaccessible.
Humans have language. And that
again, the link is more nuanced than that. It's not just
you didn't explain it much more nuanced. You're just like, we have language and that's different.
The Bell and Russell card is very specific to centering our methodology for going about things in the post-structuralist idea of deconstructing human language.
We said that the AF is like a good idea in the context of U.S. human relations. Why does that mean that we say that the only form of like the only method possible is using language.
Well, it's the method that the affirmative used. I
In
don't
the
think
context of Cuba,
What
so
do you
why
mean?
does that mean that we've excluded animals from all like forms of politics?
We didn't. No, we're saying specifically this is a link to the app. We never
Okay.
said you made sweeping claims about all forms of politics.
You read the like Pugliese card that's like animals are eaten, tigers eat animals. Is that bad?
There's a distinction between like nature and humanity, which has the ability to like decide not
But
to
aren't humans
eat
like part of
animals.
nature? So why does that mean that us eating animals is bad, but other animals eating animals isn't?
Again, there's a distinction. Like, did you want to add something
I
else?
wasn't listening, sorry.
I'll move on. Your best evidence is just like the reason that oppression exists is because of anthropocentrism. Where does it make the claim that getting rid of anthropocentrism would solve other forms of violence now?
It says this is the foundation upon which those forms of
Right,
violence
but it doesn't make
exist,
a
right?
reverse
So if we
causal
disrupt
claim.
that foundation, those are no longer stable categories into which we can place.
It doesn't make a reverse causal claim. It just says
It
that
makes-
hierarchies exist now because of those hierarchies.
It makes that it makes the claim that in order to challenge those forms of violence, we need to challenge.
Does
the
it make like a
foundation.
sufficiency claim that would be able to solve all
It
forms of
doesn't use the
violence?
word sufficient, but it says that the
It never
foundation
makes
for
a claim
those
that-
forms of violence is anthropocentrism, and that in order to challenge them, we need to challenge that.
So some
structure
people love
prior.
non-humans, but they're still like racists, etc. Why doesn't that disprove? Zane, are you gonna take prep? Can I take prep to have the answer to that question?
What was it?
Some people like animals, but they're still racist or sexist. Why doesn't that disprove the idea that solving Notre would solve other forms of violence?
Liking animals is different than like being like, oh, I like animals is
Right.
different than
Some
understanding
people are like,
animal and human on the same plane.
Right. Some people do view animals on the same plane. So why doesn't that disprove that?
I think that's just an assertion you're making.
Okay, that's cool. So we're at 640.
646 or 640.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I go to the bathroom?
No, should be sound. What is my case? Okay.
Maximum.
Do the standard one. Ryan, myself as well.
I don't have money for you. You want to give me a $2 bill?
Gets
I'll see if they accept this.
I'll give you 2 singles for it.
Thank you.
Oh, alright.
See what you do, Ryan.
You sent it out to me?
Yeah. Case? Okay.
Their understanding of what constitutes a readily text and intertextuality is flawed, and choosing to ignore the horizontal axis of literature, they prevent literature from achieving multidimensionality. Chandler 13. One of the weaknesses of structural semiotics is the tendency to treat individual text as discrete. The semiotic notion of intertextuality produces to refer to text in terms of two axes, or a horizontal axis connecting the author and the reader, and a vertical axis which connects the text to other texts, as well as setting it within the totality of previous to synchronic text, of which a transformation language is a system which pre-exists the individual parse requires that it is language or speech, where the only language acts performs and not be. A text is a multidimensional space where a variety of writings on the original bundle class of text is an issue of quotations, and they missed the boat here. We aren't saying that all attempts to decipher are flawed, but rather the specific denote of history of the United States has to be juxtaposed and neglected and rejected by our canon of history. Their card doesn't say impact denotation because guess what? It's not always bad. And on Robinson. Psychoanalytic concepts are backed by fMRI data and chemical secretion. Berlin 9. Advances in technologies permit scientists to measure brain activity. This has led to revival of psychoanalytic concepts and conscious processes, removing anxiety, provoking thought suppression, is amenable to controlled experiments. The desire is toward irrational instinct to avoid the action they impose, may display itself in other ways. Suppressed desire cannot influence behavior. Some good suppression is a myth with no scientific support from our data supported. Otherwise, people suppress memories by exerting effort that can be tracked in the nervous system and was only treated by Freud. And Lacanian and for psychoanalysis is based within science as the Cartesian subject. Evans 9. Psychoanalysis proceeds in the same status as science. Psychoanalysis mainline us to what can be understood by science. The Cartesian subject is the subject of science for Lacan, or Marxist discourse of scientific is math. This is what lies behind psychoanalytic theory. The formulae also encapsulated further scientific discourse that should be transmissible. Lacan's allegiance to the rational tradition helps to explain the criticism in which he levels to one of scientific research's criticism or aimed at science based on empiricist assumptions and not science itself. Lacan is not criticizing science, but only in particular from which he regards as a deviation from true science. Psychoanalysis is not based on any appeal to an ineffable experience or intuition, but on a process of reason, dialogue, and furthermore, the lack doesn't exist as per Robinson, or it can only be used to control or reject the contradiction between the Robinson and Dean evidence for fairness, because it makes the negative moving target means we can never win. On Dean. Dean is talking about biopower regardless of what it's talked about, and specifically he says that seeing the population as one monolithic structure is bad. We're not talking about the population, we're talking about the ideology that has been espoused by the culture as a whole, i.e. in 1957 when the image of Castro in the olive suit was distributed, we saw him as masculine because of our own preconceptions. That's something we need to challenge on Anthrop. Challenging the federal meta-discourse is crucial to break down anthropocentrism. If we don't learn to challenge the knowledge given us, we are open to manipulation. That means any adversity collapses the all. B. Knowledge produced within a university discourse is always self-serving and bureaucratic, only seeking to prevent taking the role of history. Means without rereading history, we are rendered automatons of the state. And the lack will always friend attempts to understand the environment. Attempting to glaze over the lack reproduces a university discourse. Switch down 6. The current ecological crisis questions emerge unquestionable presuppositions with willingness to question our very assumptions about what nature is lead to a fear that will stop acting as what to lead would do the catastrophic consequences of obsessive acting as a tactic to stave off ecological and Armageddon actors ignore the inseparable gap between our symbolic representation of nature and actual nature's a necessity and unbridgeable gap, the presumed existence of a dynamic balance and equilibrium. This solidifies our conviction of the possibility of harmonious and fundamentally benign one nature if we could just get our interaction with it right. The pseudo debates circle around an assumedly known nature invites imagining ecological texture of the world. Future ending seems easier to imagine than transformation of the neoliberal capitalist world than the nature we work with should necessarily radically imagine symbolically change, charged and radically different. And breaking down power hierarchies among humanities are prerequisite to all solvency. English 12. One must not be forced to choose between biocentrism and anthropocentrism. Non-human and human nature are as inextricably bound to each other as the ventricles of the heart. The very notion of dominating nature has its roots in the domination of human by human, and hierarchies that brought women into subjugation, patriarchies, working people into subjugation, or systems of exploitation, and so forth. Does anyone seriously think these cultural changes can be achieved in a society that pits people against one another as subjugated and subjugators? The second aspect of social ecology's naturalistic perspective not only challenges misanthropy, it challenges conventional social theory as well. The social conflicts have fostered the development of hierarchies and classes based on domination and exploitation. The hierarchical mentality of the system has been extended out from the social domination of people, particularly the young woman and people of color, into the realm of non-human nature. Until we participate in the project of liberating human beings from domination and hierarchy, our chances of saving wild areas and wildlife are remote at best. We should never lose sight of the fact that the project of human liberation has now become an ecological project, and all this co-authored by heterosexual anthropomorphizing, rent solvency, and reproduces chauvinism, root causal to farms and domination. Lead 9. By insisting that the only way to escape ecocide is to disavow precisely that which women have been systemically denied for virtually this isn't highlighted, all highlighted in 75 you. The whole of human history, the opportunity to experience and develop a humanly centered self, reproduces male privilege. From this point on, it's highlighted. When they speak of putting an end to anthropocentrism, they manifest their own ethnocentrism. That male privilege is built into Bender's view. This not surprising equation of human centeredness with human chauvinism. This criticism applies to any ecocentric perspective. Their failure to recognize that human chauvinism assumes a prerogative enjoyed primarily by men, reproduces the reproduction of future oppression, even in an ecological sustainable utopia. The moment we treat something as it exhibited human qualities, we have already gendered and heterosexualized it via the norms naturalized by our forms like the use of gender and heterosexualizing language is basic the ways in which we experience the world, whose most fundamental institutions remain dominated by those men. Human centeredness is not necessarily chauvinistic, and permutation do both analysis of anthropocentrism alongside rereading androcentrism is crucial to all solvency. Marina 9. The historical manifestation of anthropocentrism has been androcentric. You consider this an androcentric social organization to be structured around male domination hierarchies, and an androcentric conceptual bias to be the one that denies or overlooks science about the situation of women. Like that about the connections among systems of domination. Human chauvinism describes that only humans are morally considerable. The implicit use of men as the standard against which equality is essentially used to describe false claims about women and faulty generalizations about humanity and well-applied oppressive conceptual frameworks when the beliefs, attitudes, values, and assumptions reinforce or maintain socially constructed views of females and males in a way that inferior rational behavior. And Bell and Russell also advocate the term, quote, we hope to illuminate places where these streams of thought and practice move in directions compatible with our own aspirations as educators. And language and text as links is preposterous because they posit human language as superior to things like whale song. Just because I cannot understand it does not mean it is subjugation, and who knows whether or not animals can understand our discourse. And your Pugu's evidence uses written text as does Colley. Quote, this paper is therefore written in the place of those uncounted and unnamed non-subjects of political space, and links to omissions are overwhelmed by the permutation. Mordian 2. Any textual presuppose the existence of people thanks to institutions that have hardly mentioned expulsion seems to prerogative of a term for the fact that no text can answer all possible questions about its own background and its own presuppositions, so does all authors of literary text and historical narrative should be read as one version of a story that could have been told and should be told in many other ways. And resolving anthropocentrism doesn't resolve systems of domination empirically proven by Nazism. Durkin no date. How can anyone read the Nazi writers and say environmentalism started with Rachel Carlson? Should we all be so worried about any of this? Modern environmentalism seems so innocent. The green policies of the Nazis were more than a mere episode or aberration. Environmental history is large that but to larger meanings and demonstrate with brutal clarity that conservationism and environmentalism are not and have not ever been value-free or inherently benign enterprises of fashion. Demagogy and tyranny were the ultimate culmination of a long-term process which had initially had an innocent look. Green thing. It was not a sideline for the Nazis. It was the green attempt of the Nazis to recreate a peasant society which led them to invade Poland in a search for a living space. It was their green nostalgia for the Middle Ages which led their blood and soil racist ideology back on case. Challenging the noted discourse in the classroom, such as where we are now, is crucial to overwhelm the neoliberal and neo-imperial taintings of knowledge as a whole, because our Anthropocentrism evidence indicates that actually, top of the flow. Our role about is that the judge is an educator determining who best challenges dominant and narrative discourse in US-Cuban relations. That's best because because education has to be prioritized over everything else. For instance, our Bell and Russell evidence indicates that we have to change to be able to be compatible with our aspirations as educators, both in ourselves and in the judge. And on the impact debate, our rereading breaks down the colonial structures because it changes the history that allows them to be invisibly subjugated, i.e. as long as we see ourselves as the savior of Cuba after the Spanish-American War, we can never engage on them on an equal, meaningful level. Ryan?
I'm interested in this, they talk about like psycho causes governmentality.
Oh, they talk about how psycho causes governmentality. At worst case, this is already happening in status quo and there's only a risk we reform it, and that psychoanalysis is happening as psychoanalysis of like individuals by therapists. What we're talking about is a counter history done psychoanalytically.
Okay, how does fMRI data demonstrate that the lack is a thing?
Sure.
Because your card just says like it shows things in the brain when desire happens.
When an EEG occurs, which is what determines fMRI data, it can trace. It can see how your brain, certain parts of your brain react to certain images. It will take people who have talked about repression or desire in their lives, and it will see how they respond to these.
Okay, but those are like slightly different than the understanding of the lack that the affirmative is presuming upon.
No, it's not, because it's also what they're missing, their desire that can be tracked. And repression is the core concept behind the lack, because you're always seeking to pave over our repression, a little bit like your critique against our swinged out evidence.
So I'm a little confused by your argument about the contradiction between our Robinson evidence and our Milchman and Rosenberg.
Yeah, one of them acknowledges the lack and the other says it
the
doesn't.
Milchman and Rosenberg evidence says that psychoanalysis, it doesn't take a stance on whether psychoanalysis is real or not, it just says that it is used for control. Why is that contradictory with saying that it's not even real to begin with? It still could be constructed.
The argument. The one C argument is that it is used to create control.
Yeah, it's used by like.
If it has a visible effect, that means that the core concept.
Why does that mean that it is not just a constructed thing that is used by? I don't understand why that
presumes
it's
constructed
real.
doesn't mean that it's relevant. I mean, our construction.
I just don't see why that's a contradiction on our part.
Because one is determining that repression and
Milchman
has
and
an
Rosenberg
impact,
don't
and one is
take a
saying
stance on whether
repression
psychoanalysis is real or not. Why does understanding, or what does understanding the environment have to do with forefronting the animal? You make the claim that
you're attempting to. It's okay. The Swinchdown card has two warrants. One of them is that the presumed existence of a dynamic balance and equilibrium is flawed. That's
what do you mean a dynamic balance and equilibrium?
I.e., an attempt to paper over difference reinforces the law.
What do you mean attempt to paper over it? Like just saying that there's not a distinction between humans and animals?
No.
What is papering over difference in the context of the
Swinchdown evidence?
No. Well, you said is that you're saying papering over difference is the link to our position?
Not really. It's
what is papering over?
There is an inseparable gap between us and everything because of the way we repress the status quo. By breaking out of the university discourse like the AF does, we can have a benign one nature instead of two that we claim to set equal.
Okay.
What we're saying the two is what you're proposing.
Okay, so you're saying that just our position reinscribes the binary between human and animal?
It's not the entirety of the argument, but that's one of the arguments, yeah.
Okay. I guess your argument, your Lee card that says the alt's co-opted by heterosexual anthropomorphizing.
Yep.
The argument this seems to make is that this one guy named, what was his name, Bender, he says that saying that we should prioritize animals denies women from having the opportunity to experience and develop a humanly
He also
centered
talks about
self.
what human-centeredness is and how your rejection of human-centeredness is it all looks over chauvinism, that creates animal-human chauvinism. If the two
order is just the critique.
Do we have
I assume you want all 4 legs.
that would be helpful. Thank you.
There's a pretty substantial review.
Jot this down. Great.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Alright.
1 second, real quick. Go ahead.
The infinite carcass is the non-human or stacked vertically to form the very walls of all levels of civil society. Anthropocentrism posits a system of institutionalized social death upon all bodies demarcated from the structures of humanity. There's a category difference between our impacts and theirs is only the ethics of eating, the possibility of consumption that enables the devaluation to the point of social objecthood. The Homo sapien can always retain some level of agency, but the animal is doomed to be mere flesh for consumption. That is a conceded claim by the 2AC that because of the positionality of the animal can never ascend the ladder of social organization, racial and patriarchal forms of interhuman relations are contingent. However, the only body that has never received the slightest touch of progressivism is the animal body. That means its suffering will continue until the very end of time. The question of impact calculus is absolute. Only the human dies, but the animal merely perishes to unmarked graves. The gratuitous violence enacted upon the inanimate body functions as a very form of ontological decategorization that transmutes it into the non-body nucleus. There, the object then becomes the carcass. The moment of capture enunciates the crossing that will strip the subject of their ontological, metaphysical, and legal claim to the category of human entry. Marks the death of the subject, birth of the object thing, a mere carcass. They transmute it into a corporate, at least the non-body, the conversion of factory agency. There can no be relations of power unless the subjects are free to deploy term carcass to serve the residual humanism that would demand redemptive agency. Carcass would not be limited or redeemed, for whom no justice will be served. The useless suffering is intrinsically meaningless. The violent political caesura through its human and animal division renders all those killed as animal carcasses that do not die but merely perish. The metaphysics of anthropocentrism, the animal cannot die but can only come to an end. Only the human dies. What remains is the carcass, not worthy of mourning. The production of the carcass is generated by 2 intersecting modalities of violence, instrumental and gratuitous. Instrumental violence is enabled by soma-technical instrumentalities. The gratuitous violence enabled by this necro-political matrix ensures the detainee is entrapped in ensemble power relations that cannot be lived through, and that the categories of subhumanity make possible all other forms of repression on Homo sapien bodies is always made possible from a distancing from the 0 point of the animal body. This means we turn their impact because they can't turn ours. The condition of possibility for patriarchy and other forms of power only possible via the connection to the animal, via the connection to the animal and human body. For instance, indigenous groups were deemed closer to nature and this rational and inferior. That's our Bell and Russell evidence now. The first argument is that they are necessary to break down anthropocentrism. First is that we're impact turning all of their arguments about the manipulation of discourse of why that is simply merely the engagement of a language games. That presentation of discourse merely obfuscates the ontological division between the human and animal, which will be more on the link debate. But their arguments why it gets manipulated denies that this is the division that we are speaking to is one that is ontological. Now, their next argument is that the lack prevents attempts to understand the environment, but we are not an attempt to understand nature. This evidence is about humanist attempts to stave off environmental collapse via technocratic and neoliberal solutions, which is obviously not the alternative. Our argument is that we need to implode the category of humanity itself to stop assuming rationalized nature of rationalized knowledge surrounding nature, which is what they do via their indication of the Cartesian subject. Now, their next argument is that breaking down human-human binaries first is key, but first is this evidence simply asserts that human-human domination existed first. I'll do the history work here. The first form of hierarchy involves human domination over animals. About 10,000 years ago, the rise of agricultural society laid the groundwork for the oppression of humans, with shifting from hunting and gathering and bans to settled agricultural practice. Animal domestication asserted human dominance over non-humans, creating the metaphors, models, and technologies used in things like slavery. Metaphors included the plane of humanity over the plane of
animality. The model was the concept of rationality, which posited humans as superior to all other beings, using non-humans as the first measure of alterity. This was expressed through animal exploitation. Later, when we see slaves were treated as livestock by different exotic peoples, became seen as non or subhuman, and were placed in the violent system first created for animals. This is the condition of the capitalist patriarchal system. Their evidence describes the form, the basis for the existence of relations with Cuba in the first place. That's a piece of best evidence. This evidence is also a link because it says that we must posit human liberation first. This is exactly what the Colebrook evidence and the one he gets at, which is that they presume that humanity is the wholeness of humanity is A, possible, and B, desirable. The alternative implodes that signifier and says that no, it is never that simple. Human liberation is never possible, and attempts it to unite that only overwrites the ontological division between the human and the animal. And the next argument is that the alternative is co-opted by anthropomorphism. This evidence is a critique of some dude named Binder, who assumed that human-centeredness had redemptive qualities. The critique to human chauvinism. The critique obviously disagrees with this. We do not think that human-centeredness has redemptive qualities, which means there's no risk that it recreates the privilege that their evidence talks about, because it attacks it straight at its foundation, which is the subject that would allow for things like patriarchal subjugation of other of humans. Now, their next argument is the permutation. First is that they do not get one because they do not have a plain text. They have chosen the one he sees a political performance. We should be able to isolate links based off of it. Otherwise, it is impossible for the negative traditional models. Cost-benefit analysis are based off of opportunity cost, but that is impossible in this debate. Utilizing those models also uphold hegemonic models of debate, which means the permutation should be a reason to reject the team. The one issue should be framed as a genealogical exposition of the oppression they isolate. They should be responsible for their genealogy they have represented. We have performed the method of our counter methodology. The one issue was a speech act that they simply did not perform. Our colored evidence says that the process of writing in the animal is uniquely political and academic spaces. However, this is something they have not done. The permutation begs the question of the one issue historical accounts. It still links her severance, which is phonish because it makes the one issue moving target laws, and despite that, all link around, but more importantly, it destroys argumentative possibility or responsibility. Any link argument I witness an independent case after the permutation, as well as the firmness methodology. Their method of reading history is a method towards an end. If we win the end is anthropocentric, then we link turn the entirety of the case. Now, the link today, the first is that the one issue has named the wrong system. If we win the turns case debate, then we win the anthropocentrism with the first and most foundational hierarchy, the absence of the animals, the presence of anthropocentrism. This means two important things. First is that the genealogy of the one issue has failed to accurately trace the impact they have isolated, which means they should lose on face because the counter methodology has a better political method. Second, it means that the firm is just rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic. The systems of anthropocentrism will manifest themselves in other forms of domination because the last method will calcify. This is proven by the 2EC's benign invocation of the Cartesian subject. Now, our first decided the 1EC is language games. The app is caught in the humanist concern with communication and desire. The only desires that matter are those that can be expressed in human terms of human sexuality. This obscures that there is no mythology of the phallus for the animal. The 1EC's method of very conception of a subject that can lack also presuppose human consciousness. Second decided is human subjectification. Their invocation of the Cartesian subject via their evidence from the 2EC case was the foundation of the Enlightenment's declaration of human superiority over the animal from Descartes. I think, therefore, I am. The human positioned itself as the only animal possessing reason that exists through space and time. This allowed for the slaughter of the natives as they were deemed animalistic and close to nature. This proves why the 1EC turns in on itself, because their method is one that ultimately relies on the structures of colonialism. Moreover, their understanding of agency and roles of educators, university subjects, and students ignores the positionality of the animal. There are two sets of universal evidence laid out. One is distancing. The necessity to transform the world is always an attempt to move away from the state of nature towards a more attuned to a world attuned to human habitation. The positionality of profoundly anthropocentric and parts of the methods of ecological destruction that ironically inhabit the habitability of the planet for humans. In the first place, this has been utilized to oppress individuals that are deemed closer to nature. That was explained about based upon the agency presumes the capacity to engage politics. In the first place, there's an epistemological and geospatial divide between the human and the political sphere. Now, the 1EC says that we need to analyze history. The negative asked a prior question, which is that how is this we predicated on a prior form of forgetting? A prior form of getting. They say Bell and Russell advocate the permutation. No, they don't. They're a critique of the 1EC's educational pedagogical method. But I was explained on the link to it. They say link omissions are resolved by the permutation. First, this presumes you get a permutation. Second, it says that the Bell and Russell evidence indicates silence implicates a political project. Failure to foreground the animal means it turns in on itself. They say anthro doesn't solve domination. This is critique of the Nazi environmental movement, which is obviously not the alternative. It was a Nazi environmental movement, said that it still maintained racist notions. The alternative would obviously implode those because we're not Nazis and we're not mainstream environmentalists.
We'll take some quick up. Alright, 6 seconds. And what was the time before that so I can write it down?
You had 6:30 before.
Thanks.
6:28 is where you're at.
Thank you. Okay. In your genealogy of human-animal divisions arising with agriculture, correct, right?
that is the first example that we pointed out where that be.
Okay, how is the consumption of meat in a pre-agrarian society not the same consumption that you're critiquing?
I mean, we would object to that too, but
okay, why
more specifically, our tracing of that oppression and the technologies and metaphors used in that began
why did human-animal divisions arise in the first place?
Because of the settled human society that
So when we were hunting and consuming animals, that was not anthropocentric.
No, that consumption,
so
perhaps was a violent process, but the idea of the Cartesian subject did not exist at that point.
Okay, so there was no division at that point.
There was what do you mean?
Okay.
The Cartesian subject, which we were objecting to, did not.
Cannibalism has happened it's stopped now mostly, but empirically happened in the islands of Fiji. How is that not an example of a human being reduced to zero political ontology?
I mean, our argument is that the ontological framing of violence, the ability for a human to be consumed and to be priorly reduced to a subhuman,
so humans
necessitates
can't be reduced to that same level. Humans can't.
It doesn't.
That's
That's
what
where
you
I'm
just
getting.
said.
Right. That's where I'm getting. The ability for the human to be consumed demands that it be reduced to subhuman. But the ability to be subhuman necessitates the existence of the animal body, which we say is the zero point
but they have
of
been
that
reduced
structure.
to subhuman. Where does your evidence say that rejection of anthropocentrism is reverse causal and ends that ability to be subhuman?
Why does it doesn't use the term reverse causal?
Where does it say that resolving anthropocentrism?
All of our evidence says that the foundational hierarchy
was
anthropocentrism,
hierarchy.
and that only by challenging...
Why, when our education systems teach us that we are superior, will we be able to shuck the myth of superiority? That's the one I see. Our educational systems trap us in a sense that we are superiority.
Yeah, and you reify those educational systems by subscribing to notions like the Cartesian subject.
So,
in the idea that...
What do you mean we reinscribe those educational systems?
Like when the 2AC is like, oh, we agree with the Cartesian subject. That is the foundation of Western knowledge.
Just clear that issue up. That evidence is talking about why psychoanalysis can be accepted.
Your reason why psychoanalysis was true was that it was consistent with the Cartesian subject. We are objecting to
not that it is based upon the Cartesian subject.
That it's consistent with it, i.e. it agrees with that and is consistent with that scientific mode of knowledge.
In the sense that a person can undergo therapy as the subject. Does anything leave this round?
Does anything leave this debate?
Yeah.
I mean, we think that our performance might affect how people live their lives and how they understand
Will you claim impacts off of anything leaving this round?
I mean, we'll claim impacts why your knowledge was violent and reproduced anthropocentric knowledge.
Oh, thanks.
Same way that you...
I just need to email it, but it's going to be the case.
Chargers all tangled.
Take a second, bro.
What do you want it to be? Just write one and hand it to me.
Puts you at 310.
Sorry, just a second back. Let's go all the way around.
You pass me the same.
You.
Yeah.
Order, sorry. Order is.
It's just case. Starting, I'm going to start with the roll of ballot because they said go back to the top of the flow at one point, and that's where I put it at the top of my flow. So, anybody not ready?
Their roll of ballot links to the Anthrop critique. Mike did this analysis on the Anthrop page because it necessarily presumes the judge is an educator, which is the critical pedagogy that the Bell and Russell link describes initially. The role of the bell should be the who best challenges human structures. That is key to break down the hierarchies and solve the impacts in this debate. Now go to the death of the author part of the debate. I'm not sure that their Chandler card makes an argument, let alone answer ours. The 1AC citations impose a final signification upon the text which closes the writing. It flies in the face of the affirmative's attempt to deconstruct the text of Sarine. It is solely denotation of the 1AC by presencing the author as ever having existed in the first place, and it prevents any active and deconstructive interpretation. This just recreates the violence of imperial signification, which turns the case at a higher level of analysis. Even if they are making arguments that denotation isn't always bad, the argument of the 1AC is that it must be coupled with connotation in order to resolve the affirmative, which means that they can never do this because because their citations foreclose the connotative reading of the 1AC that is required by all of their solvency evidence. This is a 100% takeout, and it's an easy way to vote negative on presumption. Now, the psychoanalysis part of the debate, I'll start with the Robinson and lack stuff, because the existence of a constitutive lack is a tautological assertion which refuses explanation and operates under an order not to think but merely accept. Disagreement is answered by stating that there is something wrong with or dangerous about opposing the theories that psychoanalysis asserts upon itself, which is the Robinson evidence. This predetermination of psychoanalysis predetermines the social world in advance, which produces a metaphysics and ensures the replication of domination. Robinson and 5. The analytical schema is fixed advance of the relation between the schema and the existence of organized hierarchies ordered to the exclusive advantage of the former. Sweeping generalizations and shortcuts between specific instances and high-level abstractions evade the middle level. He wants a direct jump from the singular to the universal without reference to particular context. Now, their card about fMRI data doesn't demonstrate that the lack is real. It just says their evidence just says that studies have shown increased brain activity when people desire things. No, duh. That's obviously going to happen. It doesn't presume the existence of the constitutive lack that all of their evidence assumes on it. It doesn't fundamentally answer the impact turn arguments that we are making. Their arguments about lack also link them to the Anthropocentrism because it assumes that the only desires that matter are those that can be expressed in terms of human sexuality. There is no mythology of the phallus for the animal, which is a central tenet of the affirmative, and all that. And that all presupposes human consciousness, which is another link to the Anthropocentrism critique. Now, the impact turns to their psychoanalysis debate. This was hardly answered in the 2AC. All I got was that it contradicts the Robinson arguments that I made, but there isn't a contradiction because Milton and Rosenberg don't presume whether this psychoanalysis is legitimate or not. They just say that regardless, it is used by the government in order to maintain control of populations. Psychoanalysis relies on normative conceptions of desire that can be used to categorize individuals. That form of normative categorization violently paves over the individual uniqueness and is co-opted by security apparatuses to further oppression. For example, the concept of desire has empirically been used to oppress gays because they don't correspond to the normative interpretation of desire, which was the one. Psychoanalysis is a dividing practice that dictates what constitutes a normal subject, designating individuals as pathological renders them powerless. That's Milchman and Rosenberg and Foucault, which was focused on the danger represented by psychoanalysis in disciplinary society. Repression and domination through violence has been largely replaced with disciplinary technology. This is one of psychoanalysis is one. Psychoanalysis as a device role in constituting the modern subject. There is no overt conviction that exists in the ultimate totality. The modern subject is rarely question action based on unexamined assumptions have painful consequences. Arbitrary cruelty instilled in regular institutional arrangements are an integral part of development as disciplinary society. In case of psychoanalysis, this refers to thinking and it creates binary oppositions, dividing practice as individuals as insiders and outsiders. Such ordering dictates what an individual should be, then develops an administrative practice to see that such individuals or produced individuals are specified to the expert as pathological, feel perverted, and unable to speak the truth of their own lives. Psychoanalysis designated homosexuality as pathological. There was something designated a state that was promoting healthy, desirable, and normal. Homosexuals were trapped, causing general personal anguish to be described rationally, rendered unhealthless. Their result is discursive and medical practice. The human individuals become calculable and manageable, and you should reject the app by voting negative for power relations inscribed in these practices of psychoanalysis. Milton and Rosenberg and 2 systematic cruelty flows from the thoughtless and aggressive conventionality through disrupting our present practices shows that they were historically created in Foucault to foster distance and need to see the dangers and the more critical intellectuals to question and market in them. And they don't fundamentally answer the impact claim of this, which subsumes theirs. It is the ability of sovereign power to manipulate populations for control, which enables their domination, the biopolitical determination of the threshold beyond which life ceases. To have juridical, according to the biopolitical order, creates the category of life devoid of value, which spills over to the biological body of every living being, nullifies value to death. That's a Gambin. 98 sovereignty is limited in immediate counterpart determination threshold beyond which life ceases to have any value and can therefore be killed. The new juridical category of life devoid of value corresponds to the bare life of Homo Socrates as every realization and politicization of life plans a new decision concerning the threshold beyond which life ceases to be politically relevant and can be eliminated without punishment. Every society sets its limits. Every society decides to its secret realm will be bare life now. Dwells into the biological body of every living being, and they say at the bottom of the challenging discourse in the classroom is key. That also links to our arguments, and it's not
responsive to the impact terms.
But we were at 6:40.
6:28 actually.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, 244.
Oh. It's gonna be the case and then the critique. I'm gonna go with overview.
Rendering charts.
Yeah, Zane's emailing it out. is Anthro, and go into the overview. The role of the ballot is that the judges and educators challenging the meta-discourse proposed by the U.S. If I win that, stepping out of that meta-discourse is good, which I'll explain on the critique. That means we win the role of the ballot debate, the death of the argument, the death of the author argument. The Chandler evidence says that what makes text interrelational is that authors can connect with the readers, which means that getting rid of that relationship leads to one-dimensional text, which cannot be used as a revolutionary starting point because it does not open up other new points. The psychoanalysis argument, psychoanalysis works first is that we have the fMRI idea, the data that proves that people's subconscious reacts when you show them pictures, which proves that they have an underlying desire for things that has been suppressed, i.e. it proves that the lack is a real thing. The second argument is that Kant used science and mathematics to prove that psychoanalysis actually works, i.e. data that proves that it has worked on a larger scale, which is a conceded piece of evidence that disproves all of his arguments. There are arguments about why we need scientific data linked to the K because it's the same idea that we need critical pedagogy, which makes the link debate as a wash. Also, they say that we link to the K, but the Cartesian subject is different. Our argument is just that we are consistent with the Cartesian subject, but we did not say that animals cannot be part of that. The claim that we need to be consistent with the Cartesian subject is made by their own evidence, which proves that they link to this as well. The last argument, the biopower arguments, only thing that matters is education, i.e. if we are able to break down the bureaucratic education, that means that people won't be automatons that are causing that type of repression in the first place, which means that if we create better education, it solves the impact of this. Also, rejection doesn't do anything because it's inevitable in the status quo. There is psychoanalysis in the status quo. Also, in 2013, they declared that there is no quote-unquote normal being, which proves that it is not just grouping people together, which is the extent of the link analysis done in the 1NR. Also, large groups act like people around a maypole. That's Vulcan and Forfishlies theory around a large groups, imagine people together in a maypole and they chance of identification with each other built upon the metaphor by imagining a large class of people following description of dual identity. We can discover the large group identity of people whom will meet each other in lifetimes and illustration of large group identity. People wrap around the leaders of the belief that a canvas erect, psychoanalytic constitution may help develop useful strategies for large group identities. Market at large group analysis.
We're not using this to psychoanalyze.
We're not using psychoanalysis to analyze individual people,
but rather
the collective actions of the state. All of their evidence is about using on people, which is distinct. The critique. Case outweighs because we cannot control the violence that is committed by other people, i.e. the only thing that we take away is the education of this round, which means he doesn't get access to the extinction claims. He makes out the line by line. He's conceded a pretty big diss out to the alternative, which is case. They can't solve the app because their root cause evidence is not reverse causal. It does not say that solving Anthro solves all other forms of violence, but rather that Anthro just caused the violence in the first place. They have not explained this in the context of Cuba. They have also functionally conceded the Guertin evidence. It's not a K of the alternative, but a reason why the K cannot explain all violence. The Nazi viewed animals and nature on the same level of us, as yet they still massacred the Jews, which proves that solving anthropocentrism does not solve other forms of violence. Now, cases major diss. We break down the meta-discourse presented by the U.S. with our counter-history, which is something that they have not done. This breaks down the attempt to regulate knowledge that takes part of the university discourse, which means that the knowledge created by the U.S. meta-discourse is void of revolutionary potential and necessarily flawed in order to protect the massacred, and guarantees are becoming automatons designed to uphold the current system of domination. That's true and true, which turns the case, because as long as some forms of oppression exist and other forms will exist as well. The Angus evidence is not a link because it does not say that we cannot solve for anthropocentrism. The permutation obviously overcomes arguments for why we said that it's important to focus on humans. Now the permutation debate. We should get a permutation. It's illogical to vote negative if there is nothing wrong with the app. They justify reading no links, which undermines the discussion of our app. Obviously, if they are able to prove a link, then they should be able to be the permutation, which proves that it's opportunity cost. We have performed the affirmative, but that does not mean that we preclude other performances, which means that there's no reason to reject the team, or worse, reject the argument. If you think it's a voting issue, we are responsible for the 1EC, but we are not mutually exclusive with writing in the animal, which means his framing arguments don't make any sense. We don't severance because we'll defend the 1EC. The links do not take out case because our method is is not mutually exclusive. Now, the link debate, we did not name one system that is the root cause of everything, which takes out the first argument. Just because after not talking about humans, it doesn't mean that we don't care about them. The permutation resolves just because it includes a challenging of anthropocentrism. We did not say that our AF was a starting point to resolve all forms of violence. Rather, we are specific to the U.S. meta discourse that is good in the context of Cuba. The language link doesn't make any sense because if using text is anthropocentric, then anything that humans can only do is anthro. Obviously, species are different, but the logic that their logic would say that a bird flying is violent to other animals. The 1AC does explain it better in Cuba. They have not done any explanation of why anthropocentrism caused Cuba, which means that we did not quote-unquote name the wrong system. Say the Cartesian subject argument. We did not say that humans are the only people that can change the world, but rather that there are certain things that humans do in the status quo that is bad, but the AF reverses that. We do not think that humans are the only one that can change the world. If using text is the last argument is that the agency is bad. I answered that above, but obviously we are different from animals. Not acknowledging that is not a problem.
310. Yep.
sorry, the critique with a short overview and then
the case. Or then the critique proper than that piece. Critique case.
structuring thesis claim, which is that the ontological social death of the animal body is a distinct form of gratuitous violence from which all other hierarchies stem. This means only the alternative is the only method that can challenge violence, because the app is stuck in a humanist project of subjugation. This means we access a massive external impact based off of the ongoing genocide and social death of the animal body described by the Pugliese evidence, and a massive turns case argument, which is our argument about the ontological division between the human and animal as structuring a ladder via which there is the human, the subhuman, and the non-body, the object thing of the animal. Only that ladder enables the process of all other forms of violence, which is an ontological claim that 1AR simply does not have an answer to, which means the 2AR obviously should not get new answers to this argument. Now, the top of the critique page, their first argument is that the case outweighs. I really don't think they extended a coherent impact to the app in the 1AR, except for some vague argument about colonialism. We are winning that the foundation of colonialism, i.e. capitalism, patriarchy, and all of those are grounded in the humanist structure, stemming from the Cartesian subject and animal domestication. They have drawn pretty much, granted us all of our historical analysis described by the best evidence, which is that at the dawn of the domestication of the animal and the movement away from hunting and gathering to the dawn of the Cartesian subject, was the human was able to declare itself superior to all other to the animal. From Descartes, I think before I am, it created the metaphors, the technology used in things such as slavery, and rather created a perfect idea of the human subject, which is implicated throughout the 1AC psychoanalytic project and proves why all of our biopolitics arguments link to the case. Now, their next argument is that the root cause is not reverse causal. This is not a counterclaim debate. You're right, our evidence does not say reverse causal, while the best evidence makes very specific claims, which is that all of those other modalities of violence stem from anthropocentrism, which means only the alternative comes to grips with anthropocentrism as a structure that permeates educational spheres such as debate. The 1AC can do nothing to do that, which means only the alternative has solvency. Their next argument is that the critique cannot explain all violence. Their only warrant for this argument is that the Nazis thought they were equal to nature. That's crap. Their evidence describes the Nazi environmental movement, which was grounded in the idea of a pure human who could possess scientific domination over nature, which means that scientific domination over nature, which means that it was still complicit in humanist tropes, which explains why things like racism and racial purification persisted through that movement, because it was still centered on the Cartesian scientific subject. Now, their next argument is that they are a counter-history. We are link-turning all of your arguments. Their argument that they think mere playing with concepts such as desire and language can alter oppression is crap, and actually obscures the more fundamental ontological division, which is that of the human versus the animal. Now, they say their only warrant for why the case could possibly turn the critique is that if some forms of oppression exist, then other forms of oppression will also exist. Obviously, the alternative would resolve that if we win the anthropocentrism, and that ontological foundation is the foundation of those other forms of violence. The permutation debate first is that there are only justifications for the permutation that are based off of claims such as that it is logical, not mutually exclusive, or not an opportunity cost. They have conceded a claim that all of those tropes and all those adjectives and ideas are grounded in the hegemonic model of debate, which presumes they have assumes they have a plain text. Now, even the second warrant they've conceded, which is that the permutation does not include the performance of the 1C, which means it cannot hope to access any of our solvency claims. Third answered the permutation, which is that it still links. I'll do the link debate here. I really don't think that 1AR really answered any of our link arguments. The first is that is our language games argument, which is the Bell and Russell evidence that the app is caught in a humanist concern with communication and desire. They've conceded the argument that the only desire that matters to the 1AC are those that can be expressed in terms of human sexuality. This obscures that there is no mythology of a phallus for the animal. Second is our human subjugation argument. Their argument that psychoanalysis can be validated because it's consistent with the Cartesian subject is exactly our argument. You are still grounded in that idea of the human subject, which is actually perpetuate colonial's violence, which proves why the app actually replicates the violence it seeks to solve in the first place. The alternative was conceded by the 1AR, which is to write in the place of the animal. This means we must interrogate and deconstruct the absence of the animal. In this place, we win a link argument. That means you should reject the affirmative. The process of writing in the animal yields a more self-reflective ethics, does not include the non-human, which means centering the ontological position of the animal is only done by the alternative, and they have no solvency. They have to go to the case page to roll it out. It's who best challenges anthropocentric educational structures to deconstruct humanist structures. That resolves all of their arguments. The Robinson evidence says that there is no coherent subject. The lack is a myth that assert the empty facility of a particular ideological schema or rejecting any argue for its assumptions. It is a tautological, relies on itself for justification. Refutation is ignorant or dangerous.
244.
244.
Sorry, this church is... I blame the wall. Anyone not ready? Breaking down the federal meta discourse is crucial to open new ways of knowing because the status quo classroom where repressed is knowledge is seen as a threat to its identification as masculine. That means we are rendered automatons because the knowledge we make decisions based on is pro-colonial in nature. The F breaks the classroom knowledge regulation down by proposing an alternative curriculum. The O can never fulfill this need because they fail to rebuke the history handed down to us in the classroom. That means that has two implications. First of all is that the O can never solve because we are just automatons. In a world where we are automatons, the federal government can just tell us one thing the day after their alternative and things go back to the status quo they are now. Where the United States has done domination over other countries. And independently, the meta-discourse recreates colonial subjugation by allowing the teaching of American superiority to continue. That tanks all solvency because until we change education, domination will continue because we are taught to dominate. Even if they win a root cause claim, post all the domination just pops back up. The only way to create a permanent solution is to reform the way that we learn. And yes. Massive concession in the two and R means there's no offense on the psychoanalysis. Vulcan indicates that we psychoanalyze large groups instead of individuals. All of the evidence is based on the use of an individual man, an individual being, whereas we looked at the desires of the group as a maple. The analogy is that imagine a tent on top of a maple. Everyone is within it, however the maple still is in one direction. And the role about is that the judge is an educator determining who best breaks down dominant and normative discourses in US-Cuban relations. That's best for any of the reasons listed in the overview on Anthro. What else on case, Ryan? Few more reasons psychoanalysis is good. First of all, they completely dropped our DSM reevaluation. What this means is they can't get any offense because all the reasons in psychology were bad were based on normativity. However, when the DSM was changed last year to announce that there is no actual normal being, then instead of there's no mental disability, rather it's the idea that every individual thinks differently, and sometimes the systems of grouping the way individuals thinks is practical. And I think that's sufficient. Anthropocentrism. Their social death division isn't relevant if the all can never actually create any change because they are automatons caused by the automaton DA. And there's like a few flaws with this. First of all, is that this already has spread to humans. Look at cannibalism in the Fijian Islands. That means that we have to reject domination as a whole. If we want to reason why anthropocentrism as a whole isn't a root cause, it means that you can just as equally reject dominance in humans to solve for these divisions. And they say that we granted all the root cause of analysis by best. However, two issues. A, they extended they just said the access to their bioimpact. There was no biopower impact in the 2NR. And on the root cause debate, they have taken our Nazism evidence the exact wrong way. What Guertin is trying to say is that even when we prioritized animals, we then don't look to humans. For instance, as Germans strolled through their lush forest with preserved animals, and they look to create equality between species. They never viewed. They look towards other humans like the Jews, and they could still oppress them. That means that any movement in the right direction isn't sufficient to solve. Rather, we need to change the way that we are taught what to value. That's from the overview, and also on the root cause. Our Angus evidence indicate. Okay.
It's not reverse causal, which takes out the results case.
They say the reverse causal, that whether or not it's reverse causal doesn't matter because it isn't a counterpoint debate. However, this is a poor mishandling of our argument. What we are saying is that maybe that's the way in which it originated, but that's not the way to resolve it. For instance, on case, the way that we resolve the male masquerade isn't to give back Cuba, even though it started with the signing of Cuba in the Spanish-American War. Rather, it's to create a new way of knowing. Onto the link debate, or actually, they have conceded multiple justifications for the perm. One is it's most logical. Obviously, they have not proved the absence bad, and there's no reason to reject it. It's their burden to prove a link, but if they have not, then just because we left something out of it doesn't mean we excluded those two as dialogue. They justify not reading links, which is asinine to parents learning about the app, and his only answer is that this is hegemonic debate. This is just an assertion. There's no impact to this viewer. Voting for whoever challenges humanism best, and permutation is obviously the best option, and we disrupt that hegemonic structures in debate in the first place. That's our Trump and Anko evidence, and we don't have to reperform the 1NC. This debate is about possible methods. 1NC happened, but the app doesn't preclude that from happening. If the 1NC opens up ground to the alternative by challenging the methods, this all works best. Link debate. On the language, like obviously all species have different ways of communicating. Just because we use a text, it doesn't mean that we have completely excluded animals. That logic would follow that the idea does nothing that only humans can. The idea that doing anything that only humans can do is bad. Obviously, some animals can fly, but that's not violent to other animals. Second is the cycle link. We did not say that only humans can have political identity. The permutation solved. They conceded they linked to this just as hard. And next is the critical pedagogy. They linked just as hard because they said that we need to follow the Cartesian plane on case. And what's the other one? On the link of omission, we can't include everything that was wordy, and we resolve this by changing debates. Basic permutation means that if they are included in our performance.
congratulations to both teams for achieving this level of success in the beautiful places of Weber State. The decision is unanimous, and it is for the negative from Bishop Guertin.
Thank you. Okay, I'll start. I thought that first of all, I thought that the negative had a larger impact than you did, and I don't think that there was, and they are pretty consistent about describing the scope of violence inflicted upon the non-human. So simply on the level of like, if it's just stacking up impacts non-human versus the colonialism that you reverse, I think they have pretty good reasons why they just have a larger magnitude. I also think that you do a considerable amount of work to try to insulate some of your impact from theirs, and which is useful, I think, and good work. But I think they at least achieve inroads into human oppression. Even if not all human oppression can be explained by anthropocentrism, a great deal of it can. And so I think that they give a means of resolving that. I think that the alternative at least yields a more self-reflexive ethics, which is the way that they describe it. A great deal of your solvency claims make it difficult to form a basis of differentiation between the af and the neg. Because like you talk a lot about how it doesn't spill over, like what does the alternative really do? How does it achieve larger effects within the social? That seems equally obscure for me for the affirmative, and it seems like we're talking about sort of different orientations towards scholarship either way. And so it doesn't seem like you have a rallying political strategy, or that you accomplish some more efficacious form of activism. So I'm not really sure how that constitutes a basis for differentiation. I think that Bishop Guertin's pretty far ahead on the link debate. I think that you do a good sort of technically do the right thing by pushing back somewhat on this, but I think that they are usually that they're a step ahead on most of these individual link arguments. Like, for example, the centering of language. You're like, well, you're using language too. But I think they go a step further in argument resolution, because they're like, well, yeah, obviously we all use language, but we don't need to center that as the basis of our politics. And when we do that, that's uniquely anthropocentric. I also think they win a link to the Cartesian subject, because you keep saying like, oh, well, we're just saying we're consistent with it. But I don't think that really answers the question, because I think that like using fMRI data and stuff like that, and like your evidence claims that it's that it actually upholds it, and that being consistent with Cartesianism is something that should be praised and should be a reason to prefer a particular analytic method. That seems like a link to me, and I think that they just go a step further in that explanation. And so I don't think that the permutation is really just kind of explained as like, well, potentially we could do both, but I think that if they win a link, the permutation doesn't really like accomplish anything for you. Like, there's no explanation of it as a proactive method in which we should try to resolve it, or in which, I mean, like, this might be a sort of more productive route for you to take if you were to say like anthropocentrism only, or resistance to anthropocentrism can only be politically helpful, or only can achieve things politically if it is combined with human interests. It is less pure then, but it at least forms a strategic bridge to a more generalized resistance to anthropocentrism. It can't be all at once, so coalitional politics good. That's not really in the debate, though. I just think that would be potentially a useful tack for you to pursue. Yeah, that's like sort of most. Oh, the last thing that I have is that I think you're correct in that you say that you say that they are not reverse causal. Like there's no reason that breaking down anthropocentrism breaks down other forms of oppression. I'm potentially sympathetic to that, but I don't think that like you do the next step of unpacking that to say why the AF achieves something reverse causal. Yeah, because because you say like they aren't reverse causal, fair enough. And then you're like, but we are, because if you contest one form of oppression, you should like contest all of them. And once again, it's the thing where like you have a potentially accurate diagnosis of their position, but you don't have the next step of saying, and here's why we're different from that. And it seems like you fall prey to a lot of the same kind of inadequacies that you diagnose in their politics.
For the link debate, so do you think that there's better ways of answering like the language and Cartesian subject, or do you think that we should just like try and outweigh that with a stronger net benefit?
Well, yes, I think that you should try to outweigh it. I think that something about how like yoking human interests, achieving a bridge to it, would be potentially like kind of helpful. I'll be really quick because other people should talk. That'd be really helpful. And the Cartesian stuff, I think you should definitely say, like, we don't endorse that. We are only responding to your criticism. We should reject that evidence. We are not tied to the advocacy of every piece of evidence that we read in the 2AC.
Yeah, so I kind of start from the same place as Nuch in that I think that the negative is winning a much larger impact. I think that that is really a big deal, particularly when we get to a place where we're kind of comparing solvency deficits, right? There's a lot more on here, I think, in the 2NC than in the 2NR, but the 2NR is sufficient, I think. And I think that none of your arguments really deal with this distinction they're making between the ontological scale of violence that's happening and sort of the AF's sort of education inroads. I think that's an impact distinction that's not really dealt with. So I think that because of that, it's sort of hard for me to care that much about the 2AR arguments about how we become automatons. That is itself, I guess, an impact, but it's not really explained why that impact is super important, and more importantly, how it interacts with theirs. And I think there was potential for it to do that. I think that might be, for example, a reason why you could say that language games are good, because they allow us to be more than automatons. Perhaps we become more thinking and educated beings that can then do things like excavate the sources of anthropocentrism, right? And then this isn't just a defensive no-link argument, it becomes a reason to prefer your advocacy. Similarly, that could be a way to justify the Cartesian subject, although I don't think that you should do that. I think you should do what Nuch said and run very far from that argument. I'll get to that in a minute. The other thing is that I think that their argument about the language link, for the same reasons I just talked about, is not only a link to their argument, but it also sort of complicates your ability to solve the AF. They're not doing a ton of argumentation like this, but there's a little bit of it when he goes to that part of the link, specifically in the 2NR, and says that that means you'll never be able to resolve systems like colonial violence. Now, probably maybe you have an impact that's distinct from that, but I think at least it also serves as a way of sort of limiting whatever impact the AF still has. I agree that they're pretty far on the link debate. I think this Evans Cartesian subject link is actually kind of a big deal, and I think you're not really paying it the respect it deserves. It gets top billing in the 2NC overview for a reason, and that is sort of the foundation of Western philosophy and its attempts to create the very structures that they criticize. I sort of cringed when you read that argument in the 2AC because I think it's potentially a much bigger link than anything they had in the 1NC. So I agree, you should run from that argument all the time. And I think it's there to defend psychoanalysis from sort of scientific critiques of it, but a lot of philosophers have beef with Descartes, and the anti-anthropocentrism people are right up there. And I also think the language game stuff, for reasons similar to Nuch's, so I won't really get into it. Now, I agree that I think you have some arguments about why they're not reverse causal. It's just that there's a risk the alt doesn't solve, but I think that the 2NR is doing more on your example of why it doesn't. It isn't until the 2NR that I think that there's a really clear answer to your example, which is the Nazi Green Movement. I mean, you kind of get there at the end of the 2NC, but the 2NR does a pretty good job of explaining why the Nazi environmental movement was centered on the things they're critiquing, and the 2AR doesn't really come back from that. So although there are still doubts about whether or not the alt would proceed to solve, I guess there's that thing about moral reflexivity. I think that can be a bigger part of the 2NR than it is, because I think the 2NR is a little inadequate when you try to deal with that part of the debate. You're just like, sure, it's probably not reverse causal, but it's the root cause, right? And I think that that is the way to do it, is to talk about the ethics of consumption. But even if there's a part of the F they don't solve, it's sort of outweighed by the critique.
It seems like the panelists sort of all in the same place about the impact question, but this is not unanticipatable given the strategic choices of the 1AR, and so I'm going to amplify what Antonucci was saying and suggest that if deprioritizing the impact question is a conscious choice in the 1AR, then refocusing the rest of your arguments to account for the fact that you're not going to push back on the impact debate is absolutely essential. And there are a couple places where you can do this. I tend to think that there is I guess maybe I tend to give a bit more currency to the automatons, interrupt the ability of the alternative to solve argument. But I think that that's something that needs to happen earlier on in the debate. And the larger point there is that the place from a form rather than content perspective, the place where the negative seems to be more ahead is in the interactivity between the various arguments. It seems like the 2AR is primarily defensive on a lot of these questions. You're fighting to hold the line, where you need to be kicking the door in. And so, for example, when you defend the efficacy of psychoanalysis, it seems as if your primary concern is denying them offense based on it, rather than deploying psychoanalysis as a productive tool or an aspect of your methodology that gets you something above and beyond avoiding generating more offense, right? And so the psychoanalysis of the non-human is a place where the affirmative can open up some exploration that destabilizes the best link arguments that the negative has going on. And so, for example, you evoke the concept of whale song earlier on in the debate. Perhaps that is a non-human language game, right? The colossal arrogance that only humans play language games is a better argument as to why the negative links back to their criticism than any other example that surfaces during the debate. Similarly, the notion that the affirmative's account of desire is limited to human sexuality is perhaps factually accurate, but that doesn't deny the possibility that we can in some way write in, to use the negative's language, space for an understanding of non-human desire. And the fact that we can't point to what those things might be, right? The fact that the claim that whale song is a non-human language game is non-falsifiable, or that it would be ridiculous of us to try and explain the therapy, to treat therapeutically the desire of the non-human, doesn't mean that those things don't exist, but it shifts that debate to the terrain of the incommensurable, and allows you to say that the method that you have employed doesn't foreclose writing in of the non-human in this instance. Rather, you explicitly refuse to speak for in these instances in the same way that their evidence denies the efficacy of speaking for and suggests instead the necessity of writing in. Particularly if you think that this is what's coming in the debate, leaving some space in the 1AC for those possibilities might be one way to accommodate that. But at the very least, given your willingness to recharacterize a mission as not something that's a link, but rather something that is organic to the process of engaging with the non-human, I think that's something you can probably also do in the 2AC. In that world, they are stripped back to essentially the centrality of the Cartesian paradigm link, which I agree with the panel is highly problematic or whatever. But it's the place where you are closest to shucking that off is in the cross-examination, right? Where you make the argument, you first make the argument that you're not advocating the Cartesian dualism so much as you're saying that the AF is consistent with it. I still think that that's a bit strong, right? Because it allows the negative to say, well, you've used this as an external metric for validation, and so maybe you didn't cause it, but you're relying on it for validity, for credibility, or whatever. And I agree, run away from that. But there are lots of ways that dualism can play out. And the body-mind distinction, when applied to the terrain of the non-human, has a different valence. If you can fill that value gap, so to speak, with something that is both appealing persuasively, but not specific enough to make you animal haters or whatever, then you're in pretty good shape, I think. I do want to address the question of the permutation particularly, given that it's a vehicle for where I began, which is refocusing the debate away from the impact question. And the problem is that you're essentially in a bind at the end of the debate. I think that it's factually accurate, and maybe that's not even something I think. Maybe that's just something I observe, that your disruption of hegemonic debate norms means that probably you shouldn't be tied to a conventional understanding of permutation. But the problem is that backs you into the negatives argument that if that's the way that you want to roll, then you need to reperform the 1NC. Perhaps reperforming part of the 1NC as part of the AF, like I was suggesting earlier, creating space for the availability of non-human desire or non-human language. That might be the most effective form of permutation in this instance. And I'm reticent in general to say that the way that you should sort of muster your efforts is on the link debate, because you sort of in the traditional understanding, the negative is usually ahead on the link and K debates, because they're falling out of the sky, they're freaking everywhere, oh my god, what's happening? But if you can use some of these arguments as backstops against a variety of their potential link arguments, such as the incommensurability thing that I was talking about before, then this might be an exception to that general standpoint or that general guideline. But if that is going to be the case, then the permutation needs to be disruptive of hegemonic debate norms, or as disruptive as the 1AC was, because given the way that the AF is couched and the beginning with of your telling of the story, it's hard to not side with the negative that there needs to be a performative element or something similar to that in the permutation, rather than observing that these methodologies could be co-productive. It needs to happen. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you very much. You think the Trader strategy was right in what I was working with, or
yeah,
do you think I could still refocus at that point?
No, I think that you can. I mean, I was a career 2A, and so I'm going to say that you can do whatever the hell you want in the 2AR. And so if the 2AR is your option for refocusing, then refocus, baby. All right. But I do think that you're in the right places. I just think that you're in a crouch by that point, and you need to use the kinetic energy of your crouch to spring back. Okay. How you choose to do that spring back is sort of up for grabs.
Do you think that the 1AR had been more offensive, it would have been easier to get out of the defensive position in the 2AR?
I mean, kind of definitionally, sure. If the 1AR has more offense, and the 2AR can have more offense.
If you're asking how to pull this off,
yeah.
I can imagine a 2AR and a 1AR, I suppose, that uses your education claims about freeing yourself from bureaucratic educational control as a way to start accessing some of their offense. Like, we can't really get to a point where we have an ethics of consumption if bureaucracies are controlling the way we educate ourselves about said consumption, right? And if you can start to make arguments that the AF would be a more reliable vehicle for doing that, then you go from a crouch, no link, to an offensive argument.
Okay.
AF is necessary to solve.
So more on there's no system of domination that are continued if we're not taught domination in the classroom?
Yeah, or that the AF is the way to get to disrupting that.
See, my characterization of my sort of sense of the block overall, my meta sense of it, is that the block's pretty long on link, pretty long on impact, pretty short on alternative solvency. I mean, we all seem
intentional.
What? Yeah,
that's intentional.
Yeah, fair. But I think that the best place for you, I think be it the 2AC, the 1AR, or the 2AR, in any of your speeches, I think that the best pressure point against this criticism are ways in which the affirmative, even if imperfect, delineates components of a methodology that are necessary to achieve the ends that they just kind of endorse and hope to get to by virtue of endorsement. One example of this, if education stuff is also technically clearly the right place in this debate, one thing that could be inserted is a way in which psychoanalysis doesn't root the ego, but psychoanalysis is probably necessary for us to free ourselves from the persistent illusion of an ego, right? It's the kind of first structure that exposed the suture that comes in the construction of human consciousness, and therefore can be a very useful lever against the anthropocentric delusion. Especially when they have things like, they presume that their endorsement will unproblematically lead to the political conclusions that they talk about. Their failure to problematize that is an example of both the unitary ego and a way in which anthropocentrism gets smuggled back in. So there's questions of strategy instead of just the value of the goal being endorsed, I think, are probably your best pressure point. And education is like obviously the best way for you to get to that by the time that the rebuttals roll around. The stuff that defends psychoanalysis as a necessary tool or lever against anthropocentrism would kind of, you need a card and it would have to be a two-way thing.
I think this also reframing the negatives alternative mechanism or platform or whatever as a form of education as well both allows you to paint them with some of the link arguments, the critical pedagogy link arguments that they initially lodge, and allows you to posit the alternative being the absence of any particular mechanism. Hey, we revealed this to you. Why hasn't everything fixed itself? Oh wait, this is why one of their first questions was what's a teacher, right? They genuinely don't know, right? Take that at face value, and at the end of the debate, return back to the beginning. It puts you in a position of being able to tie the alternative in knots that are not severable by virtue of the psychoanalytic aspect of the method, which also does what I was suggesting before, which is make psychoanalysis a crucial pivot in your argument rather than sort of garnish that is potentially poisonous, right?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
I had one thing I wanted to add just real. Way too much. I thought for me, and this is maybe just a confession of bias, but one that might be useful for whatever future, but like permutation, amount of time spent on you don't get a perm. Not a fan. I don't know. I think that's just like you're winning a bunch of links. You want to spend the time winning those links. I'd stack this way lower. I'm also just like fundamentally unpersuaded by that argument, because if we really had critical debates without perms, then there would be no comparison of how different methods interact. It would be like plan, and one team would just be like, Blurg, here's our thing, and then be like, oh, it's our thing. Who's root cause here? Those debates, I think, would be fairly terrible.
One other thing is if you're looking for ways to make your alt solve apps like this, check out Bonobos.
Yeah, it's right.
Ooh.
You know what I'm talking about?
The chimpanzees?
Yeah, they basically resolve everything with sex. They're just like pansexual and like uninhibited in sexuality.
Polymorphously perverse.
That are instructive for humans, yeah.
Yeah, to borrow something from Uncle Freud. Yeah.
Someone